Hello, geography. Today we're going to kind of continue learning about industries. Yesterday we looked at the Industrial Revolution in the past. Today we're going to look at what is happening in the modern day. We're going to be looking at Weber's least cost theory and the impacts of transportation on industry, and specifically looking at bulk gaining industries versus bulk reducing, as well as looking at why do businesses start up and why do industries start up where they start up. We're going to be looking at those different factors and kind of introducing what industry looks like more today. Out of the whole world, you're going to find the world's manufacturing in these three regions: Europe, North America, and China. We're going to see these three regions being where almost all of the world's manufacturing is located. Uh, Obviously, there's manufacturing other places, but this is going to be where most of the world's manufactured goods and industry is going to be located. Industries and companies today, they're really looking for one thing. This is going to be relevant and kind of be talked about a lot. Keeping the costs low. They want to increase their profits as much as possible. And the place to start that is to keep their costs low. So how do we do that? How do companies keep their costs low? Well, they find cheap or more efficient, ideal locations for their factories and businesses. We're going to look specifically at what are some of these examples of these ways companies keep costs low and kind of how they do that, because this is going to be a big important factor in where industries start up, as well as where companies and other industries are going to be moving uh, to create the cost of manufacturing their goods low so that they can increase their profits. So we look at two different considerations and why do companies or industries start up in certain places. The first one is we're going to look at is site factors or absolute location. These location factors or characteristics that contribute to cost of production. So these are going to be what producing the actual good is going to cost and depend and impact that cost. So first, labor. How much do you have to pay your employees? Certain areas of the world, you can pay your people less than other places of the world. So this is going to be a big factor in moving industry around in order to create the lowest cost efficient measures for companies or industries to create. If they could pay their company or pay their workers less, they're able to make more money. So the price of the wages or the rate of the wages is going to be a big factor in determining where an industry starts up or moves to. Another one to look at is land. Affordable land for factory businesses near transportation so their workers can get there or their goods can be shipped. They don't want to build on a very expensive land with a lot of high property taxes because, again, that's going to keep that cost of running low. So they want to kind of figure out where is the cheapest place that they can build in order to be the most cost efficient as well as make the most profit. So they're going to be looking at land prices a lot of the times. Another one is capital. Business that are available to fund new businesses. So if they're able to have more capital, they're able to create more industries, more factories, maybe even increase labor or increase their production rate. So having that capital around to kind of create new businesses or create new industries in the area is going to be a good sign that people who own these industries or own these businesses or manufacturing plants are willing to put their industries in certain locations. So these are called site factors. So what is it? What contributes to the cost of production at that location? So we looked at site factors. And remember, you can pause this if I'm going too fast and take your notes down that way. So we looked at site factors. So this is like what's actually happening at the place. Next, we're going to look at situation factors. So these are relative location. Site factors were absolute. What situation factors you're going to be looking at is finding a location that's close to the resources or close to the market. Usually they're trying to figure out a place to build. They're not going to be looking at the three factors we talked about last slide, but they're going to be looking at what or where their resources are or where their market at. So if you are a logging company and you are in the business of making paper, or let's say you're a paper mill company, you're getting logs or wood shipped to you. Are you going to want to be closer to the forests where they're getting these logs or further away? So this is going to determine where you want to put that paper mill. You typically want to put it closer to the forest or closer to where you're getting your resources from to decrease shipping costs. Or if you're a different kind of market, would you want to have your industry or factory closer to where you're actually selling your goods? It just depends on which factors or which price is going to impact you the most. And we'll look at kind of how companies actually take this into consideration when in deciding where to build their factories or their industry locations. So situation factors are going to be a big part of where industries finally end up being. But both are going to be kind of under consideration. So you got the site factors about cost of labor, cost of the land, and then you have the situation factor of where are they located in regards to the resources they need in order to make their product, or how close are they to the actual place that sells the product they're making. So we see the situation factors. There's two sorts of industries in determining what they're manufacturing and kind of the industry going along with them. We have bulk reducing and bulk gaining. These kind of are self-explanatory. A bulk reducing industry is kind of going down from a heavy product or a lot of it, and the final product is going to be a lot lighter or smaller. So we see potatoes are very heavy compared to potato chips. So that would be a bulk reducing. So as the process goes on, the product ends up getting lighter. So you start with these heavy potatoes, and you end up with these light potato chips. In a bulk gaining industry, we kind of see the opposite. So we start off with different materials that tend to be lighter, but your end product is heavier. So we see this with like sugar or the pop industry. The ingredients they're getting aren't as heavy as the ingredients they're shipping out, so they're gaining bulk during this process. It's going to be really important kind of looking at these two because it depends on where you start or where you actually put your industry. So remember we talked last slide about whether or not they should be closer to where they get their resources from or to where their market is. If you're started off with your resources being heavier, you might want to be closer to your initial resources so transportation costs go lower. But if your resources that you're using are lighter and can be shipped easier, you might want to be closer to the market you're selling at. So we're going to see this on the next couple of slides and go into a little bit more detail about it. So you have the bulk reducing, which starts with heavier objects and the product that is finally produced is lighter. And then you have the bulk gaining industry where they take a bunch of lighter resources and then end up with a heavier product. Also, things that play into fact where people create their or start their industry or their factories are kind of these two factors. Single market for manufacturers. They make products sold primarily in one location. So you have like some car companies that are for the like one country. They're not being shipped across the world. You also see this with perishable products, so things that can go bad. So if you have like a fresh fruit stand, where you get it is probably going to be where or pretty close to where it is grown because shipping is going to be harder because things can go bad. So you see this with meat and produce. The food you tend to get, especially fresh produce or fresh meat, are oftentimes closer to are grown or created closer to where they're sold compared to things that can be shipped across the world because there's not really a perish by date. So when it comes to bulk reducing and bulk gaining, we see transportation being a major factor. So they consider the weight and the distance. Heavier stuff, you want to ship shorter because heavy stuff is more expensive to ship. So we talked about your paper mill. Shipping logs across country is expensive because they're heavy, but shipping paper in trucks is a lot easier and you can ship more for the same amount of price. So they're going to, the paper mills, the people who actually create the paper are going to be located closer to the actual forest where the logging is happening compared to where they're selling the paper. But if it's a bulk or gaining, you might see the opposite. So you might see the factory closer to where it's being sold because the cost of shipping would be cheaper because it's less heavy. So businesses want to ship the goods in the cheapest way possible, and we're going to kind of talk about that a lot. How can they make this the cheapest, the most effective? And when we look at Weber's cost theory in a little bit, we'll kind of help come up with a solution to this. So Weber's least cost theory. This is going to be telling us the location of a factory is based on the minimization of transportation costs. So where they create their factory is going to be based on the cheapest shipping costs that they can come up with. So remember, we talked about bulk gaining, bulk reducing. If the heavy resources are shipped, you want to make your factory closer to where those heavier things are being shipped from, so lessen the cost of the shipping. Shipping is going to be a big one because remember, the goal of these businesses is to keep costs low and keep profits higher. So Weber's least cost theory is the location of the factory is based on the minimization of these transportation costs. So for example, we see the factory or bottling plant on this little triangle. We have Thirsty Town where it's being sold, the sugar where resources are needed, the water sources. You see the factory is located closer to the place where it's sold because it's heavier than the products being shipped to them. So sugar and water, sugar is very light compared to liquids, so they're going to be furthest away from the sugar resource, but they're going to be a little bit closer to the water because it is heavier than that sugar. But the heaviest part of this industry is going to be shipping the bottles full of Coke or pop or whatever to the market. So they're going to be closer to where they're selling. So you see on this little triangle, this would be where the factory or bottling plant would be located at. So we also have to look at the break of bulk points. Every time a good is transported to another transportation mode, the cost goes up. A break of bulk point is location where transfer among transportation modes, boat to train or semi-truck to train, is possible. So trying to figure out the most effective shipping route is going to be really important. Do you go to train to truck? The more types of transportation you have, it's going to go up. So, for example, if you just have a semi trailer picking up your product and shipping it to another place, it's going to be cheaper than if you have to use a semi truck and a boat to ship it across the seas, or a truck to a plane. You're going to find the more different types of transportations you use, the cost goes up. So it's going to be important to kind of keep the most effective route you can to make it the cheapest. Because remember, at the end of the day, you're trying to make that profit. We're going to see this with the central place theory. It looks at the location of consumer services in terms of market area, range, and threshold. So this isn't necessarily about industry per se, like factories, but it's going to be about where you would start up your business. So you look at the market area. So who are you trying to reach for your business? This is going to be important to select the right area, because if you are, for example, a snowboard company, are you going to start selling snowboards in the southern point of Texas? No. So you're going to want to find a place where the things you're selling are going to be bought by the people living in the area. The range is the maximum distance people are willing to travel to use a service. So you want to kind of stay in the area and figure out how far away are people willing to travel. For example, things like Topgolf. If you lived in the east suburbs, like or southern St. Paul, things like that, is the Topgolf in Brooklyn Park, is that too far away for you to go, or is it worth the drive? So you're going to have to figure out what is the maximum range people are willing to drive. For example, for me, growing up in Iowa, our closest Walmart was 35 miles away. We were willing to drive it because the service was good enough that it was worth the further drive. We're also willing to drive an hour and a half to go to a mall because there wasn't much market in the area, as well as we were willing to drive further. But if you live in a city, and let's say Taco Bell is 2 blocks away, or there's a Raising Cane's 3 miles away, you're more than likely not going to go to that farther away place because your range changes depending on where you live. And then you have the threshold to think about. This is the minimum number of people needed to support the service. So how many people do you need to be interacting with your business, either buying or selling, or coming and taking part of, in order to keep your business afloat? So if there's not enough people in your range of the distance what people are willing to kind of travel to, if there's not enough people in the area, it's really going to be hard to keep your business afloat, because there's not going to be that or reach that threshold that you need in order to stay afloat with your business. Retailers determine profitability of a site by calculating the range and the threshold. So how far are willing people to go, and what is the minimum amount of people needed to make a successful business? So we kind of talked about this on this last slide, but how far are people willing to travel to reach the retail store? That's going to be important because if it's a good store, people might be willing to travel further, like something like Cabela's. Maybe people are willing to travel further away from too. But if it's like a small grocery store, people probably aren't willing to travel that far to go to it. They'll probably see what's closer. So it depends if you're specialized in things. It depends on what the range of your store will be. Again, that threshold kind of determining what you need to sustain your store. How many people do you need, or how much money do you need to sell in order to keep your store afloat, is going to be a big question people have. So that's going to kind of sum up what we're talking about today with industry in regards to Weber's least cost theory, looking at what does it look like for companies and where to these industry or these factories decide where to kind of create their factories is going to be a big kind of determination on how well the company does, because they're going to have to figure out how to keep the cost as low as possible to increase their profit so they're a successful business. So looking at all those different factors that we discussed is going to be very important when it comes to looking at where they should actually build their industry or build their factory. So you should be able to fill out your Learning Target guide for this section. Hopefully you've been doing that as you kind of go along. If you need to rewatch or pause to write things down, go do that. Otherwise, have a great rest of your day.